So, hello everyone. Before we start the workshop, I would like again to remind you all that it would be great if you keep your camera on, if it's possible technically wise. This workshop will be recorded. Oh, please turn your microphone off. Thank you. So the workshop will be recorded, and if you don't want to be part of the recording, then you could turn off your camera if you want. So in the end, the video will be uploaded in the unit of Mostafa at iVersity and at in YouTube. So you can also see it again afterwards and share it. I would also, please remind you that to keep off the microphones when others are speaking. Thank you. So again, warmly welcome to our next workshop on Amazon workers organizing against poor conditions and discrimination. It is very nice to see familiar but also new faces in this workshop. As you know from other workshops, this should be an interactive workshop. That means that we count on your active participation in form of questions and comments, and you can either raise your hand with the technical function in Zoom or write a comment. But if it's possible, please raise your hand to explain your question a little bit better. So sometimes it's hard to understand, fully understand written questions. And if your question has been answered, then please put down your hand. So my name is Mira, and I will lead you through the moderation through this next hour with our expert Mostafa Henaway today. Mostafa is an organizer at the Immigrant Workers Center in Montreal in Canada, and also a PhD candidate at Concordia University in Geography, Planning and Environment. Thanks for being here, Mostafa. I would like to start the conversation by asking a question. And after that, all of you can start asking questions. So my first question would be, your interesting video states that Amazon relies mostly on racialized immigrants, Blacks and female labor who are considered cheap and available. In your specific case study, you're looking more into at the religious discrimination. How do the other forms of discrimination, race, migration, status, gender, play out in these other Amazon facilities? What have been some of the strategies to combat these other forms of discrimination?
So thank you so much, Mira. Thank you for the Global Labor University for making this part of this course and this module. And so, I mean, in terms of Amazon, because Amazon is the largest employer in the United States. So, I mean, when you think about Amazon as employing 1.5 million people globally, obviously different forms of discriminations play out in different localities, right? In different fulfillment centers or facilities where the workforce is specific to that place. So to give another example would be, what took place in Staten Island, right? In just outside of New York City, in the historic organizing efforts of the Amazon Labor Union, which is the first independent union and first Amazon union in North America, right? Successfully voted. And one of the issues was clearly blatant racism, right? Towards its Black workers and Black workers not being able to move up the Amazon ladder, right? So this was a very much a key struggle inside Amazon, right? As the overwhelming majority of the workers inside Amazon and in JFK8 are Black, but yet the management and is much more homogenous, right? It's white, male. It's usually people coming from business schools or universities. So there's this tension. And one of the struggles that they had launched is to get Amazon to recognize Juneteenth, right? Which is a holiday in the US recognizing transatlantic slave trade in the United States. So one of the struggles and one of the demands had been Amazon to give paid time off for Juneteenth. But another demand, which is labor related, but also deals with the question of racism, is to actually some clarity on the process in which workers are promoted, right? So to deal with the questions of racism. Unfortunately, Amazon has its own way of dealing with it. Advertisements that say Black Lives Matter. Amazon creates what are called they used it out of the tech world, but it's actually even out of the anti-globalization movement, where you would have these um, small network meetings, and one of them was around the Black Employee Empowerment Network, right? So and where workers would get together and they can support workers, Black workers specifically, to have better opportunities within Amazon, right? But clearly one of them would be just simply clarity and transparency over the process of promotions, right? So if you look at Christopher Smalls, he was one of the major leaders inside the Amazon labor union, and he was denied a supervisor position something like 46 times out of 50 times he had applied, right? So there are clear forms of discrimination that sort of take place inside Amazon. Another example, sort of locally, is that certain unfortunately this happens in many workplaces where certain communities or certain ethnicities are given certain positions, right? And so this is an issue that may be deliberate, or it's a strategy that's not deliberate. But again, it's something that Amazon is very much sort of aware of and attempts to address it. And because Amazon is sort of, it's not like other corporations where it's much more adapt, it's much more savvy to the contemporary language, right? Contemporary discourse, right? Around race, around gender. Even though one of the things they claim is that they're quite diverse, right? This is the most incredible. We're an extremely diverse corporation, which is true. But the problem is, as soon as you go up the hierarchy within Amazon, that diversity sort of begins to drop off the map very quickly. And at the level of CEOs, it's simply just white males, right? And so at the leadership level within Seattle. So I mean, this is sort of some of the issues that are inside Amazon, but are reflective of the broader issues outside Amazon as well. And the gender question is also really important because there's also a gendered layer where Amazon, unlike a lot of other warehouses in the logistics sector, is actually much more diverse, right? So in my own research, these facilities will actually have women workers as opposed to just very male dominated, right? But one of the problems and one of the issues that are coming up is the right to reproductive uh, rights. I mean, not just for Amazon consumers in the United States now with the Supreme Court decision to roll back Roe and Wade, but also before. So Amazon relies on these what are called super cycle shifts. Workers are expected to work 10 and a half hours. And a lot of these Amazon facilities are actually about, an hour and a half, one way or another for people to get to. So these workers will have 14-hour days. And so for a lot of women workers, it means that they won't have the ability to actually to see their children, right? Or to functionally have a family, right? And work at Amazon. But unfortunately, Amazon is one of the major employers. So this becomes a very big issue for a lot of women workers and being able to actually to raise and see families. So one of the demands has actually been to reduce these super cycles, right? That in order that women workers could actually have um, they would have time with their families and time with their children.
Thank you very much for clarifying this. I think it's very interesting, and it gives a lot of insights, because I guess I assume we all know Amazon, so it's really interesting to see this part of Amazon as well. So I would now like to open the floor for questions and comments from the participants. Please raise your hand or write in the chat. Is there any question? Okay, then I would go back to a question which we received from Brian. Brian, could you ask your question in your own words here again, please?
Okay, good evening from the Philippines. I'm Brian. I would like to ask, does your research also talk about, platform workers that are hired in Amazon, and how are they organized in terms of, or are they able to organize, and what are the challenges in organizing? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for the question. I mean, I guess one of the major issues, I mean, the central issue is that is the organizing question, right? And for Amazon, and this is a peculiarity with Amazon, where a lot of the, in my research, I discovered it, and I come to the realization until I was actually working at Amazon, where Amazon uses a sort of a carrot and a stick. And for so long, we were used to, you think of Amazon and you think of these other apps and you think about just the, degradation of work that, but Amazon is trickier, right? It really is ahead of the pack in a very unique way, right? So Amazon will use a carrot and a stick on its workers, right? So especially North America, right? So the carrot is the promise of full-time employment and benefits and promotions, and we are family, and parental leave, which people don't even get in the US. And Amazon hangs this over its workers, knowing that none of them are going to stay or use it, right? So, because for Amazon, the simple goal is, that like they want you in there, and they just want to draw every last morsel of human energy you have and then get rid of you, right? Like that's Amazon's employment policy, right? That's their strategy, right? So they know you're not going to stay past 2 years. They know that the turnover is high, and that's part of the reason why they use the digital technology, right? So it's like, it's really easy. You don't have to do any training. Workers can be integrated really quickly. The tasks are really simple. If you're just, you slam, which means you throw boxes, or you hit the label, or you're a store. So a lot of the tasks are really easy, but the turnover is immense. And so this is, Amazon does this thing where they divide the, what I call like the loyal from the weak, right? So there's like the loyal Amazonian who's been there long enough where they believe they're going to get, promoted to what's called a processing assistant or a level 3, or you're going to be the weak and you're just going to be out the door. You're so exhausted and you don't care. So for unions, this is sort of the big challenge, right? Is dealing with this conundrum, right? Where you're trying to organize people who aren't even going to be there in 3 months, right? So how do you do that? How do you, and I'm not saying it's impossible. They did it in Staten Island. And I think some of the interesting things that Amazon does that workers are beginning to really realize is that there's no real HR system at Amazon. And this is the thing about these platforms, right? And these large digital companies. there's no real, they're trying to streamline their whole HR process, right? Like it's all through your app, or it's all through, when you're an Amazonian, it's all called A to Z, right? And so Amazon workers realize that, there's small things that you can use that are challenge opportunities, right? Like uh, if you quit, Amazon can't stop you from getting back your job, right? So I worked there, I wrote this giant expose, I applied for my job back, and no one can stop me. It's crazy, right? In what world could you do that? Denounce your employer publicly, then quit, then reapply and get your same job back. It makes no sense, right? But Amazon, because their HR is simply a computer program, that's the algorithm, right? That's the rule. Um, so for a lot of the Amazon workers and organizers realize it's very hard to get fired. I mean, it's not impossible. It's happening, right? Especially to organizers. But there's an opportunity to be public in a way I don't think you could be in other workplaces. I think that's interesting, right? So if you look at, even in our case in Montreal, the MAU, the Montreal Amazon Workers Union, it's been like this open confrontation, right? And a lot of, I think a lot of union organizers are used to like, we're quiet, we're underground, no one's gonna know we're organizing, secret committees, you know. But Amazon, it's just this kind of open confrontation, right? And which is happening in Montreal at the YUL too, and is what happened at Staten Island, right? Like confronting these weird sort of what they call, these sort of mandatory stand-up meetings where they talk about the union, and um, so by being openly confronting, it's sort of it workers begin to see this pull, so it gives an opportunity, right? But it's not perfect, but I think so even despite the challenges because of the turnover, because of Amazon's model, but there's also real opportunities, right? And I think that make it that don't make it impossible, right? And also because at the end of the day now, I think Amazon workers are going to be in a better position. There was that leaked memo, right? That Amazon's actually running out of workers, right? Like Amazon is actually when you have that kind of turnover and you're trying to dominate the entire market, you're gonna, they're running out of workers, right? So they're gonna be in this conundrum where they just can't, dispose everyone, right? Or they're gonna have to automate. So it gives, I think, the union effort much more power, and I think in the next year or two, depending on what they do also with Staten Island.
Okay, many thanks for raising this question and answering it. There's a question from Vanji Ku, and she asked me to read it for her. It's a question about the Avud Worker Center. Actually, there are two. So the first is Avud, I hope I spell it correctly, I pronounce it correctly, Avud Center a trade union, or is it just a workers' hub where trade unions can go and organize workers? The second question is, does Avud Center just deal with the immigrants or all workers, citizen or not? Thank you.
So thanks, Wenjiku, for the question. So the Outwood Center it's not a trade union, right? So it doesn't represent workers formally. There's no collective agreement. So it is very much a North American, I guess, concept, which is a worker center, which is, I work at a worker center, which is, some people say they're NGOs. I disagree, but so essentially, they can be membership based, but they're more about being places where workers can go to deal with their issues and organize outside of that collective agreement framework, right? So workers can organize, but they'll organize informally, right? So the case of Amazon with Atwood, right? they organize petitions, they organize meetings, they organize a walkout, but there's no agreement between AWOD and Amazon, right? So it's being done inside the community, right, with workers at the lead. So and they do have their relationships with different trade unions, right? So particularly I think SCIU was one of the big supporters of the AWOD Center. So as well as United Electrical Workers Brothers. So they're open, right? So they're not tied to a single union, but work with many different unions. And does the AWOD Center deal with immigrants? I mean, it deals with all workers, right? And and from the experiences of speaking with them and working with them. And so because a lot of these people, the AWOD Center, so in the Minneapolis region, right, it's predominantly new immigrants, refugee claimants, other migrants, mostly coming from Somalia, mostly coming from East Africa. And I mean, that's why they did the organizing in such a way that they could be reflective of the workers in that community, right? So but obviously the worker centers, our worker center too, right? It's for all workers, right? So citizen, non-citizen. I mean, that's the whole point, right? To address those gaps in the trade union movement.
Thank you very much. There's a question of Elira, please.
Yeah, on this one, Mostafa, on worker center, do I understand correctly that they're usually supported by trade unions financially because they're no membership organizations, so the unions try and support them? Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of worker center, and some are more tied to religious denominations too in the United States. So there's a great book by Janice Fine, Organizing Workers at the Edge of a Dream, and it's about the immigrant workers' experience in the United States and their organizing, because some worker centers, so one good example was always the Taxi Workers Alliance, which became a union and then became self-sufficient on dues and their own membership. But a lot of them are financially dependent on outside sources, right? Our worker center too, right? Our membership is symbolic. So we're reliant on Unifor, Confederation Syndicat Nacional, CSN, as a whole host of unions. And so the Warehouse Workers Center in Chicago, which does a lot of great work, is relying on the United Electrical Workers. So it depends, I guess, on the union sort of set up in the different cities or what's happening. But because sometimes they see it too as being, there's a mutual relationship where this could lead to potential organizing or new models of organizing. So unions in North America have become more open to supporting worker centers over time. But then also some worker centers take a lot of foundation money and then they just do service work, right? And they don't do labor related work at all, even though they're called worker centers, right? So it's a very North American, yeah.
Many thanks. Is there another question? Yes, I see a hand from Kunle. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask about the trade union activities in Amazon. I think one thing I want to clarify there is that the workers are not allowed to join a union, or they don't have right because to join a union so that they can fight for themselves. Because I think similar cases do happen in Nigeria some years ago in Nigeria. Whereby there is so many poor working conditions. Most of this foreign country, I mean foreign people, foreign country, in those people that are gonna have a company in Nigeria from another country, whereby they have similar cases whereby they push them through so many backward working conditions, but through the union which they belong to, they're able to fight the company, and they are going to give them a better and good working condition. So the workers in Amazon, are they not allowed to join a union? Or I just want I want the case to clarify.
I mean, no, the workers inside Amazon are definitely allowed to join a union, right? It's they're fully their legal right, right? Like, so inside Europe, there's now, I guess there will be a European Works Council now with Amazon, right? There was some agreement that was just recently passed. But in I mean, Amazon is just very anti-union, right? This is the big problem that we're up against, right? It's not just a little bit anti-union, or it's adamantly, right? So Jeff Bezos constantly calls it the march to mediocrity, right? So if workers had power and some type of control over the work inside Amazon, it would be the end. For him, it's the end of Amazon. It's not even about money, right? Because it's really interesting, because Amazon, um, in a lot of places where it operates, it's not the worst employer in terms of some of the conditions, right? I talked about earlier. So then you're like, well, if this is not, I've been in unionized workplaces where the work conditions are worse than being inside Amazon without a union, right? But I mean, it's a really an ideological question, right, for Amazon. And so, if workers don't have to move boxes every 3 seconds, but every 10 seconds, right, because that's safe, that would be the end for Amazon, right? That would be the end for Amazon. So they're adamantly about having this control. And so, well, it's not about the right, but it's about Amazon really pushing to the limits, trying to break unions, trying to stop unions from happening. This openly now, they were, it was funny that we, at our union campaign, they had a sign, and it was funny because it was respecting the right. So it was a big sign on the front door. Your right to a union and to sign a union card, is fundamentally your right. And it's your right to say no to a union. And it's your right to believe in Amazon, literally to believe in Amazon and our dream, and unions don't fit within that dream, right? There's like a real ideological thing to it. So so Amazon, I think, spent $4 million fighting the union in New York alone last year, right? In consultant fees. So I mean, we'll see what happens. There's a number of campaigns. So there's the Retail District Wholesale Workers Union in Bessemer, Alabama. There's now the effort by the Teamsters, and here in Montreal, and ALU in New York, right? So there's an effort that's growing, right? And I think people are having a lot less fear around the union. So I mean, I'm hopeful, but I mean, it's their right. The problem is, no one's been successful until what happened in New York. Even in places where they are unionized, Amazon tries to really, if you look at Germany, right, they've refused to sign these large, the retail workers agreement. They've really tried to deal a blow to Verdi. So they're willing to fight the union wherever they are, right? That's the thing.
Thank you very much. I saw the hand of Chinelo first. Yeah, you raised your hand again. Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Mira. My question is, do you have any available statistics on the representation of the gender representation of those who were at the forefront of these mobilizations? not just all the staff, because I believe there were people who, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm trying to listen very well. Yeah.
Okay, so I was asking because I believe there were people who were at the forefront or on the forefront of these agitations. So do you have the gender distribution of these people, like male versus female? I ask because from my experience here in Nigeria, we hardly see women get to, the apex of, or probably get to sit on the tables where these decisions are made. Yeah, they may be part of the people who eventually go out to the streets to run the protests, but they do not get to decide, maybe because there are very few women in some of those places compared to what we have of men. So I ask, you have the gender representation, like what is the number or percentage of women compared to men who run these campaigns? Thank you.
I mean, roughly, it's if the Montreal plant, it's roughly 60% to 40%, right? And I'm sending a link. I'll put it in the chat. Amazon actually keeps the stats. It's one of the only companies to actually do this. And it actually keeps the stats in terms of gender and race. So if I'm looking here, actually in the United States, it's quite actually it's dead even, and in some categories it's actually there's more women than men, right? So it's actually quite that's more in the United States, but the gender dynamic is the reverse, that it's actually more female than male. I will. So Amazon actually keeps quite a detailed breakdown of its workforce by gender, by race.
Thank you. You've answered my question. I'll go through the link after the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I had a technical, everything was frozen. Sorry. So the next question is from George. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mostafa, thanks for the presentation. And there's something that I do not get clear with Amazon workers, and I'm happy that you are here and you will help me to get it clear. Back home in my country, Liberia, we have a situation where workers in the public sector are afraid to join trade unions because of the repression from the government. But in my view, from what I follow, I don't think it is the same thing, especially now that I listened to President Biden on Radio Labor on a program where he urged even Amazon not to repress the workers from joining their unions. They had the right to join the unions. So if we have a president who is supportive of unionization, and we have so many mother institutions that are trying to organize the workers, I was really surprised when I heard that there was some kind of election at the Amazon plan and the workers refused to unionize. I was very, really shocked, given that I expect that America is a kind of a developed country where people are educated to their rights, unlike my country, Liberia. So I was really stunned that workers were now willing to join. And I cannot understand what really is it that is leading workers to have the opportunity to decide to join a union of their choosing, and they will say, no, they don't want to join a union. Will you try to clarify my doubt on this?
No, I mean it's interesting, right? So if you look at like the where Biden spoke up about Amazon not interfering and allowing workers to unionize, and then workers not unionizing, was in the case of Bessemer, Alabama, right? So Alabama. So it's in the United States South. It's a right to work state. So meaning anti-union. Anti-union state, and also the predominance of sort of racism, making Amazon one of the only employers, and and deindustrialization, right? So when you look at the South in the United States, because it's been so deindustrialized, and because of the racism, so when an employer like Amazon shows up, everyone feels indebted, not in a way that where if they unionize and Amazon leaves, then the town will have no jobs, right? So there's this real fear that they're going to lose their only livelihood. And then the second was Amazon changed the employee list, and now there'll be the second vote inside Amazon. So I am hopeful, but the question is very bizarre, right? When you have a president coming out being like, you should have the right to unionize, and now more and more you're going to see this fear around the Democrats. I think Bezos even tweeted against Biden for even suggesting price caps on gasoline, right? So like for like Jeff Bezos and like Elon Musk, this is about them, this is about the Democrats have become socialists, right? Like pro-union, regulating prices. They're trying to rein in these multi billionaires, right? I mean, in terms of corporate or wealth tax. So I mean, I think Bezos and Amazon sees this as part of the same attack, right, against them and their right to be innovative. And so what happened in December was really sad, but then it showed in New York City, where they won, and they won a clear majority without any resources and no big, Biden didn't come out and support them. It's New York's also a very large union city, right? It's a very it has a history of being a union city, and also because the tactics and strategy of the workers were quite unique, so it got around a lot of these issues.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? We still have the workshop is planned for 1 hour, so we still have more or less 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If not, I would raise a question, because you mentioned different types of discrimination and different issues in the United States Amazon workers have to face, but also you mentioned Germany, and I would like to know if there's any communication or connection also regarding that it's a little bit problematic to that trade unions can get involved in every Amazon site, for example. It's in each country, it's a different system, how trade unions work. how collective agreements can be agreed. And yeah, I would like to know if there's like solidarity or any communication between worker centers, trade unions worldwide in the Amazon field. Thank you.
So there's like a few big networks. So there's now this coalition Make Amazon Pay, which brings together, the warehouse workers center and in the different warehouse workers centers, some of the larger trade unions, Muni even, and so that's a coalition around the conditions inside Amazon, but also some of the larger societal issues. So, how does Amazon reproduce sort of racism and structural racism? How does Amazon, in terms of its surveillance, right? So there's been a lot of good, interesting activism about, because it's not just the warehouses, right? So Amazon is also, a giant data company, right? It's so one of the big issues is a lot of its facial recognition software gets used by ICE in the United States, so to detain and capture, migrants crossing. It's Amazon software that's being utilized, or by police forces. So the issues of racism inside the warehouse, outside the warehouse, and it's big data and sort of surveillance are huge issues. So there's that around that coalition as well. There's another one which is called Athena, which brings together community organizations, unions, and the workers centers. And then the other thing which has gone global, but it's only Amazon workers, right? And I think they had a very large meeting in Chicago, which is Amazonians United, right? So Amazonians United, it's just you can be unionized or not, but you have to be an Amazon worker, right? And that coalition spans, globally, right? So you can join as an individual, part of a union, part of a worker center, but you have to be an Amazon worker. And they had a large meeting in Chicago, right? So from Italy to the US to Canada, workers from Germany. So it's been quite exciting to see. So I mean, there are these very big coalitions that are beginning to prop up. I mean, unfortunately, one of the things that that needs to get talked about more is not just on the campaigning side of Amazon, which Uni is doing, but how unions can divide their resources to not compete against each other in terms of organizing Amazon, but to say, look, there's the Amazon Flex drivers, right, which are really precarious. Should we be organizing them? And Teamsters being like, yes, we organize lots of drivers, but there isn't that level of coordination. And so it's mostly been on sort of broad campaigns or a rank and file network.
Okay, thank you very much. Has someone else a question? Yes, Adlira, please.
Okay. I have two questions, Mostafa. You are also doing your PhD, right, on the topic. So I'm wondering, how are you approaching it in terms of the theoretical propositions? I mean, it is very much a Taylorist model, right? Taylorism taken really to the extremes. So, so the theories of Braverman and labor process theory have been important in tackling this model of production. Are you using that as your framework in any way? So I'm just wondering, in terms of more macro explanations, how do we see Amazon's model of production? And related to that also, because that has an effect also on the strategies that unions can embark on. And my second question is a bit more, how did this Bezos' infamous declaration of him going to space, saying, thanking workers for that. How did that backfire, or how did it become a momentum actually for organizing? Thank you.
So in terms of, so my research and the theoretical approach, so I I am using quite a bit Braverman, and I think Braverman is, and sort of thinking about Braverman and his role and the way of thinking through sort of the division of labor and sort of these, the application of technology and even the role of machinery inside a workplace in terms of the labor process, in terms of both degrading the sort of the skill, but then also how, it's still reliant on this sort of human labor, but in a very like de-skilled way, and that like the role of technology it's not to replace human labor, but it's the control of human labor, right? And through that process, right? And so and I think Braverman becomes a really fundamental sort of part of this of my research in terms of the labor process, but then also and relating that to what Braverman was also, but relating that back to beginning to actually to use, and I know it's always been popular, it's always popular, but like going back to Gramsci, but specifically on his writings on Fordism, right? And so on Americanism and Fordism, right? And sort of because that's the aspect of Amazon that a lot of people don't see, right? It's how do you actually control that labor process, right? It's like, how do you control that kind of level of degraded labor process, right? You need to create the new worker, right? And so, and again, Amazon, like Ford, is at that forefront, right? So it's not specific about, hegemony or, some grand thing, right? But when Gramsci talks about it, Gramsci talks about this idea of creating the new worker, right? Like Fordism couldn't work without this whole new worker, and that's the whole on the section on hegemony, right? In the prison notebooks, right? It's so this idea that Ford was obsessed, right? So workers had to remain abstinent and married and high levels of social control, and there was even a moral committee inside Ford that would check on workers, right? And that and that's when you got the pay raise, right? The $5 a day famous that transformed American capitalism, right? So that aspect, so of surveillance and buy-in. So looking at both the buy-in and the labor process for me are are key. And then the second part. Wait, what was the second part of the?
It was more about his this declaration that Bezos made right before.
Space. Yes, that he wants to thank all of his workers. If it wasn't for his workers, getting him into space, I think it became the most blatant moment, right? And I think everything changed, right? Like I think everything, I think for like Amazon workers, it's like my boss just went to space, like, and he should just stay there, right? Like, don't come back, right? This is the whole, the absurdity of the level of wealth inequality that had been reached inside Amazon, became so acute in that moment, because I think Jeff Bezos wasn't one of these people that like everyone knew how wealthy he was, but there wasn't the sort of the grandiosity, about he was always, there's this image of him as the hardworking CEO, right? And like him and the Elon Musk, like they're very wealthy, but it's all on paper. They sleep at their factories, they work so much, and they're innovative, right? And that's the thing about Jeff Bezos, right? You don't get this. It's not like CEOs in other parts where he has this view of being the image of the self-made sort of CEO, right? He founded Amazon in his garage and blah blah blah. But at the end, when he went to space, I think everyone just realized about that there's his specific class of people, and then there's everyone else who's working at Amazon. And so I think it changed the perception, and I think the anger among workers.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the last question is from Michael, please.
Hello, thank you. I just kept thinking back to what was mentioned earlier as a challenge to organizing among Amazon workers where they're already too tired or too exhausted with their workload to even think of expressing their problems at work, and the character of Amazon, or maybe its strategy of high turnovers to avoid workers organizing. Maybe I was thinking a step ahead. If the character of Amazon's hiring is attended by a high turnover rate, do you think it's a viable strategy as a complement to maybe internal organizing to already target the workers, the would-be Amazon workers, since we know that those who are predisposed to apply with Amazon and those who are exposed to who maybe are more exposed to discrimination and exploitation are along gender lines, immigration status, and religion. Do you think it would be a good strategy to complement internal organizing with organizing would-be workers or future workers to make them more aware of possible issues that they will encounter if ever they enter Amazon? So they may be more predisposed to organize instead of quitting. I was just thinking of possible solutions there. So, and are there efforts like these already ongoing?
Oh, I mean, thanks. That's a really interesting strategy in terms of thinking through about like organizing potential. There's been a lot of organizing ex-workers now. I think that's been like to keeping them in the fold, right? So if you look at like again, Staten Island, some of the leadership were ex-workers, right? They were workers who were fired, and so there's been a lot of efforts and arguments to keep post workers who can be spokespeople, who can do things that internal organizers can't do. So be public, not have the fear of being fired, and still wanting to be very much involved, right? I mean, in terms of trying to organize potential workers, I think that's a really interesting strategy. No one's done it as far as I know, right? But Amazon sort of has these career days. Amazon actually has career centers where people go, and they have to like they go, they get their picture, they get their badge, and so there is the possibility to actually have to do organizing before workers actually get there, right? They're large Facebook groups where you see workers beginning to like, oh, I'm thinking about applying for Amazon, right? So there's all these ways to actually get potential workers. So it's never been, I think, brought up seriously. So it's a really good strategical question that you bring up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's one last question from one Chiku in the chat. So based on Abbott's success story, do those rules on less work during fasting, multi-phase prayers rooms, etc., apply to all Amazon fulfillment centers, or it's only for Shakopee?
No, it applies. So when usually Amazon does something, it goes global very quickly, right? So ours had a multi-faith prayer room, so all Amazon facilities will have a multi-faith prayer room, and so that's a result of that struggle. So
okay. I would like, if there's no other question right now from the participants, I would like to close the conversation with another last question. It is related a little bit to the question Michael asked. Yeah, as mentioned, Amazon has one of the highest turnover rates of any corporation in the US. How does the Workers Center Avuj ensure that even with this high turnover, the level of organization is kept high and the workforce remains empowered and aware of its rights? Maybe you can use this question as a summary as well, kind of. Thank you.
I mean, despite the massive turnover in the US, I think the strategy of being a center that's like rooted in the community, and it gives it the ability to keep workers actually active, engaged, right? So even workers, in fact, so the Atwood Center is now having a campaign around some fired workers, not because they were extremely active or anything, but because of other issues, right? So even when workers are gone, they're still very much active in the community, right? So a big way that the Atwood Center is able to relate, and I think this is the important strategic difference, is that it's both in the community and the workplace, right? So even when workers, let's say, move on, they might go on to other workplaces, so they keep staying involved, or workers go back and forth. They quit Amazon, they go back to Amazon, right? And that is also sort of a trend that you see. So I think in terms of Amazon and the Atwood Center and the role that the Atwood Center is playing is that one where you can constantly be addressing new issues as they actually come up. And so I think that's a really important question, right? So in terms of and being empowered, I mean the most important thing is that they're willing to take on not very big, they're big, but they're, the Atwood Center organizes around very concrete, gains, right? Very concrete issues. And sometimes they're big. I would say maybe what they were trying to do on May 1st was, was wow for me, right? That was emboldened, right? That they were going to strike to have pay time off for Eid. That wouldn't happen, right? In a lot of other settings. So the fact that they did that was really remarkable. But I think they've been able to remain empowered because they're so strategic, right? And I think that's, to me, this incredible, we're going to start with a petition. We're going to start with a letter. We're going to meet with the supervisors. The supervisors will tell us no. We'll take the next step. So always engaging workers in the process, right? So it's not just like, oh, you don't like this thing, we're going to go negotiate. That's not how it works, right? So it's like workers are involved in every step of the organizing and of the strategy, right? Through town halls. I mean, they also have the support. I mean, she's one of the more radical congresswomen, but Ilhan Omar, and Minneapolis too. What's important, because it didn't come up in the video, is that there's also a new sense of real activism in that city or in that region, not just because of what's happening at Shakopee, but also that's the same city where George Floyd was killed, right, by the U.S. police that sparked, you know, a renewed sort of Black Lives Matter movement. So there's this overlapping issues that are happening there, but so I mean, I think for the Atwood Center, it's really about the systemic process, right? It's about, you know, this sort of step-by-step organizing approach that they're willing to take and being able to be inside the community, right? So I think those are the two key, I would say, elements. And because they have that sort of political support and union support, that they're able to keep pushing, right? And so because even if people go back and forth, and this goes back to the first part of the question, even if people, there's high turnover, it's all from the same community. So the same issues rise again and again and again, right? So even if people quit, most of the new workers are still going to be Muslim from the Somali community inside, you know, around Shikopi. So the same issues still come out, right, that need to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you all very much for your interest and questions, and Mostafa for your time to provide very, very good and interesting answers. I'm sure everyone can take something new from this workshop and even implement it into their own work for better working conditions. So thanks again, Mostafa, for your time. And yeah, for the next workshops, don't forget to watch the video lecture for our next workshops in advance. The next will be on Thursday about gender equality with Melissa Serrano. And I think we made quite a good hour full of new insights and new aspects. And yeah, I'm really glad to see you soon again in other workshops, and wish you a very, depends where you are, a nice day, a nice evening, a nice night.